Good evening and welcome to Novara Live. I'm Ash Sarkar because Michael Walker has finally let me sit in the big chair. Today I'm joined by David Adler. David, how are you doing?
Ash, this is a surprise, a glorious surprise. I'm so happy you've replaced Michael and so lucky to be joining you on a very gloomy Monday. Hopefully you and the stories this evening will bring me some degree of respite from what has otherwise been a desultory day of news.
What you can't see just out of shot is that one of my agents is pointing a gun directly at David's head, making him say all of those really lovely things. Coming up tonight, we look at the reaction to the proscription of Palestine Action. And does Labour have even more austerity in store for us? Plus, is Tony Blair involved in Donald Trump's plans to ethnically cleanse Gaza and turn it into a Riviera? And we have an exclusive interview with economist and former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis. Stay tuned for all of that and more. Before we get started, though, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support and make sure to let us know your comments in the YouTube chat, or you can tweet at us using the hashtag NovaraLive. So let's get into our first story. In the early hours of Saturday morning, direct action protest group Palestine Action became a proscribed organisation, with Home Secretary Yvette Cooper labelling the organisation a terrorist group alongside groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And just hours later, police began rounding up people who continued to express support for the group in spite of the ban. At lunchtime on Saturday, dozens of protesters from campaign group Defend Our Juries gathered at the base of the Mahatma Gandhi statue in London's Parliament Square, holding up signs and placards saying, quote, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." Now, following the proscription of Palestine Action last week, those statements are illegal. Under the Terrorism Act, expressing support for a proscribed organisation like Palestine Action is a criminal offence carrying a sentence of up to 14 years in prison. The protesters had alerted the Metropolitan Police in advance that they intended to break the law, and the Met didn't waste any time in enforcing it. 29 protesters were arrested, with some of them shouting, quote, "I support Palestine Action," and, quote, "We are all Palestine Action." These are statements that had been perfectly legal just 24 hours earlier, and which now carry the possibility of a lengthy prison term. But that didn't stop the protesters from breaking a law that they object to, calling it an attack on democratic rights. Other protesters turned out to support the group, with some chanting Free Palestine and criticising the police. Sky News asked some protesters if they were afraid of the possibility of prison.
Can't arrest us all.
It does seem that there is quite a lot of police here to do exactly that, though.
There are so many people on side. I repeat, they can't arrest us all.
I support the unprescription of Palestine Action because I don't think they've done anything that warrants them being put in the category of terrorists. I think there's a noble tradition of civil disobedience in Britain.
Amongst those arrested was 83-year-old Reverend Sue Parfitt. During her arrest, she was asked why she was there.
I'm here to stand up for the people of Palestine and the fact that this organisation has been said is a terrorist organisation.
You did.
Which is
Don't touch
terrorist, and that we are losing our civil liberties.
You make us proud, Auntie. Look after yourself.
You're a hero. You are a hero. You, not so much.
Also, amongst those dragged away was Tim Crossland, a former government lawyer and founder of climate change charity Plan B. Defend Our Juries captured the moment of his arrest.
Well, this is what happens in modern-day Britain for opposing genocide. It's quite something, isn't it? I mean, this is why the laws came in after 1945. The European Convention on Human Rights was to stop a genocide happening again. And now it's happening. I don't know. People have got short memories.
Do you want to go up next?
The mother of all democracies, people.
Just to say for those listening on the podcast, Tim Crossland was giving a very erudite speech, all while being dragged away physically by police officers. So I wonder if he practiced. It's very, very impressive. On Sunday, Met Commissioner Mark Rowley appeared on Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg. Here's what he had to say.
We saw some of the images from it this morning, including an 83-year-old female priest being taken away from a demonstration, having been holding a placard. Is that really a good use of police time?
The law doesn't have an age limit, whether you're 18 or 80. If you're supporting prescribed organisations, then the law is going to be enforced. Officers, you could see, did it with great care and tried to preserve that person's dignity, but they're breaking a serious law. Palestine Action have, over the last 18 months, have to be careful what I say because there's cases coming to trial, but some really serious criminal offences that they're accused of. There are millions of pounds worth of damage on multiple occasions. There are assaults, there are weapons used. This is not about protest. This is about an organisation committing serious criminality, and obviously the Home Secretary was persuaded by the papers on her desk to prescribe them. That law's come into force, and if people want to defy that law, then we have to enforce it.
I mean, it feels quite Orwellian, doesn't it? So first we have to believe that Irish rap group Kneecap are dangerous terrorists and terrorist sympathisers. And then punk band Bob Vylan, they're also dangerous and they should be subject to police investigation. Now, somebody's nana, an 83-year-old priest who, quite frankly, looks like she should be getting some Werther's Originals out of her purse. Now we have to believe that she's so dangerous and the police have to take action and they have to arrest her in the public interest. Like, are there not any burglaries that you could go and investigate? Or bike thefts? There's enough of them in London. Anyway, prior to the prescription coming into force on Saturday morning, Palestine Action had launched a High Court bid to pause the ban. The judge in the case refused that application, as did an emergency appeals court session held later on Friday night. But on the 21st of July, the group will seek a judicial review of Yvette Cooper's decision to class it as a terrorist organisation. And in the High Court on Friday, the presiding judge did find that Palestine Action had made arguments that raised at least one, and possibly two, serious issues to be tried. Both of them turn on the question of whether Yvette Cooper's order is proportionate. Whatever the outcome of that hearing, the government's prescription of Palestine Action has created an unprecedented legal minefield for those who support Palestine, as well as for those of us who report on all kinds of protests against Israel's war on Gaza. To help us through it, I'm now joined by Francesca Cocciani of solicitors Hodge, Jones and Allen. Francesca, welcome to Novara Live.
Hi, Ash.
So you're representing some of the protesters arrested on Saturday for allegedly displaying placards supportive of Palestine Action. What kinds of consequences do you think they could be facing if they were charged and convicted?
So on Saturday, the police was arresting those holding those signs showing support for Palestine Action for an offence under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act. Section 13 is what's called a summary-only offence, which means the trial can only take place in the magistrate's court. So defendants don't have the benefit of a jury, but it will be a district judge to decide if you're guilty or not guilty. The maximum sentence is 6 months in custody, which is considerably less than the more serious offences under the Act. But even though the risk of going to prison is lower than other more serious ones, even if you receive a sentence like a conditional discharge or a fine, which are like a slap on the wrist, convicted offenders will still have a terrorism conviction on their criminal record. And employers tend not to like convicted terrorists, nor do foreign countries when they process visa applications. And whilst, of course, these things can be affected by any conviction, you can imagine that having a terrorism offence on your record will have a huge impact on someone's life.
I want to understand a bit better how the Terrorism Act squares with other bits of legislation. So there's Section 12, which makes it a crime to express an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organisation or is reckless as to whether a person to whom the expression is directed might be encouraged to support a prescribed organisation. How is that possibly coherent with Article 10 rights to freedom of expression?
Well, that's a very good question. And it's in fact a question which, in relation to Section 12, is being looked at in the higher courts. So there is an ongoing case in between the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court that is being asked to address specifically this. So hopefully in the next few months we will have some more clarity on this. But it is an issue that has already been looked at in some ways by the higher courts. So, for example, Section 13, which is the offence where you display or you wear an item, so like a sign or an item of clothing, that could arouse reasonable suspicion that the person is a member or supporter of a prescribed organisation. So there is no need to prove that the suspect definitely supports an organisation or what their intentions were. So the Supreme Court looked at whether Section 13 is compatible with Article 10 in the case of PWR a couple of years ago that related to a PKK protest where PKK flags were displayed. Ultimately, the argument was that if you have an offence like Section 13, which is called strict liability, so it doesn't matter what's in your head, what your intentions are, you are guilty if there's reasonable suspicion you support a terrorist organisation. Is that compatible? Is that possibly compatible with freedom of speech? Ultimately, the Supreme Court found that it was. So as it stands, the legislation is compatible with freedom of speech.
So one of the things I'm really interested in is what counts as a reckless speech act, because obviously as journalists, everything we do goes through an editorial process, but it's something that's in the eye of the beholder, whether or not a court or a judge or a prosecutor thinks that something we've said is reckless as to what kinds of feelings it could stimulate in someone else.
Yeah, I mean, recklessness is a very tricky legal concept and one that many defendants often find very unfair and very difficult to navigate. What does it actually mean? If you didn't intend to do something, why should you be guilty of that? But what it means in this context is that you make a speech, you say something, and whilst you do not intend to encourage others to support the terrorist organisation, you are aware, so there is some awareness that by making those statements, there is a risk that people would be encouraged to support the terrorist organisation. And whilst you're aware of the risk, you go and decide to take it anyway. So you make those statements anyway. And that decision is found to be unreasonable. So it's a little tricky. And ultimately, in a trial, it's a question of fact for the jury to decide whether you were aware of the risks, you took the risks anyway, and that decision was unreasonable.
Looking forward, what grounds do Palestine Action have to contest their prescription?
Well, looking at the judgments issued by the High Court on Friday, following their application for interim relief, it looks like they are relying on a broad range of arguments to challenge the Secretary of State's decision. So one of these is what we discussed, so whether that decision is compatible with Article 10, freedom of speech, and Article 11, freedom of assembly. They're also relying on some more technical questions around the legality of the decision and the procedure leading to it. They're also arguing that the Secretary of State took into account irrelevant considerations like the view of Elbit Systems, which is a private company operating in the UK, and yet failed to take into account other matters which they say are important, such as the fact that PA seeks to disrupt conduct which large sections of the public reasonably consider to be in breach of international law, like the supply of weapons from the UK to the IDF, or that individuals associated with Palestine Action engage in a range of tactics and methods which do not pass the threshold for criminal liability, let alone prescription, like low-level demonstrations and public campaigns. So they have a whole broad range of arguments that they are relying on, some of which I'm sure they will be taking to the next stage.
You've defended many other protesters when they've faced prosecution. Are you concerned that the proscription of Palestine Action sets a precedent for how other protest groups might be treated?
It's certainly concerning in that this is the first time that a direct action campaigns group becomes labelled a terrorist organisation. Part of their methods include criminal damage, which are methods used by loads of other direct action campaign groups. So there is absolutely a concern that Palestine Action won't be the last organisation to be proscribed, and that these sort of methods, the government will find that the broad range of powers in criminal law are no longer sufficient to prosecute people who commit these acts, and instead they should use terrorism legislation not only to prosecute and punish those who commit those acts, but to punish those who are involved or those who show support for the organisation.
Francesca Cocciani, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ash.
Questions over the legality of Palestine Action's proscription have yet to be decided by the courts. But in the meantime, even some unlikely corners of Britain's media landscape are arguing that the Home Secretary has gone too far. This is an editorial from The Times, a Rupert Murdoch-owned paper, today. The heavy-handed branding of Palestine Action as terrorists risks seeming absurd when bona fide hostile military groupings like the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps remain unprescribed. The destruction of property that Palestine Action has made its calling card can already be prosecuted. There are legitimate concerns that such measures risk suppressing dissent on the part of those politically opposed to the government's support of Israeli defence policy. Palestine Action's members may be misguided, but Britain must remain a country in which the right to express unpopular and dissenting political views is not subject to outright prohibition. The Times joins other outlets like The Guardian, The Evening Standard, and of course, Novara Media, who have all published statements or editorials opposed to the proscription of the group. But unlike The Times, other right-wing publications have been far less even-handed. The Spectator has widely approved of Palestine Action's proscription, but this weekend they seem to call for a little terrorism of their own. Associate editor Rod Liddell wrote an article with the title, "And Now Let's Bomb Glastonbury." In the piece, Liddell says this: "A small-yield nuclear weapon, such as the American W-89, dropped on Glastonbury in late June, would immediately remove from our country almost everybody who is hugely annoying. You would see a marked reduction in the Kefir clan for a start, and all those middle-class Extinction Rebellion protesters would find in a nanosecond that their rebellion was pointless because extinction had arrived even more summarily than they expected." He continued, "I am not saying that we should do this, of course. It would be a horrible psychopathic thing to do. I am merely hypothesizing in a slightly wistful kind of way. One on Glasgow, one on Brighton, and the UK would soon begin its recovery, with only a few chunks of gently glowing cobalt-60 left to remind us of what we are missing." I mean, look, speaking as a Muslim journalist, imagine if I wrote a piece saying, let's bomb Ascot, let's bomb Windsor, let's bomb the Cheltenham Literary Festival. It would not be long before someone in The Spectator advocated for me being hanged for treason. And different rules for different people. Anyway, David, how much will it matter politically to the government and to the Met Police that the defining image on the first day that Palestine Action was a proscribed terrorist organisation was dragging off an 80-plus-year-old priest in handcuffs?
Yeah, I was saying there's something very paradoxical about this present conjuncture, where you've got the UK, but more you have the European Union as well, creating some distance from the United States, making statements like Donald Trump threatens the values of the European Union, or people trying to stand up and encourage Keir Starmer and his allies and governments to try to defend the basic values of democracy and civil society in the face of this more grotesque form of authoritarianism. But even as that Atlanticist rift appears to grow and deepen, we can see that these countries across the Atlantic from the United States are adopting tactics that, as a US American, I've seen in my country for a very long time. We were the first people to criminalize BDS, to say you're not allowed to not buy Israeli products, to use these types of prescriptions in the case of Israel, to go after dissenters, those who would raise their voices on behalf of Palestinian human rights, to have the heavy hand of that lobby of AIPAC, heavily influence the decisions at the highest levels of our government. There's something very strange going on. At the same time as there's this sort of rumbling condemnation of the US administration and of its turn away from basic democratic values. If you go to NATO, at the NATO summit last week at The Hague, it was one big parade for Donald Trump. There was not any hint of a kind of separation, divorce, or otherwise the expression of dissent about how the US is traveling in such a dark authoritarian direction. And what we're seeing on the streets of London here with this prescription, but also with the application of the law, with the very telling interview on the BBC with the Met Police saying, I'm merely enforcing these laws, is a very US Americanized version of governing civil society and restricting and constraining the expression of dissent. And so that, it's hard to see these great celebrations of the kind of decline of US American empire, the end of its cultural hegemony, while very clearly some of the same tactics that are being deployed from Washington and, of course, through their allies across the country are now landing in Parliament, landing in Westminster, landing in London, and being applied with equal force by a Labour government led by Keir Starmer.
I mean, just very quickly, isn't there a certain irony that Donald Trump and JD Vance might actually be correct when they say that there is a freedom of speech crisis in the UK?
Fair enough, in a very cynical way. But I would say it's worse than that. I would say they're playing the exact same game that JD Vance and Donald Trump are saying, which is free speech for me, but not for thee. If I point my finger from the security state at a group, in the US, we have one of these very vague terms that gets weaponized juridically, which is, did you provide material support for a terrorist group, which is incredibly vague. It could be a placard, it could be marching on the street and chanting. We've seen how this has played out, of course, in the mayoral race, which I'm sure you covered here in Novara, in the victory for the Democratic nomination of Zoran Mamdani. But we're seeing the ways in which, Israel and Israel defense policy and Israel's right to self-defense and these kinds of totems or sort of sacred hallmarks of U.S. American foreign policy now are the chief weapon with which to hit these activists over the head. So the free speech thing is so funny because, there was always an assumption, I think, as a U.S. American who's lived in England for so long, that there would be always this kind of leniency. Yeah, okay, there might be street level, the police might show up to the protest, but ultimately the courts and the legal system would understand as a deep foundational principle of the United Kingdom that there was, and its democracy, that there was something to be protected there. But it's just reeks of J.D. Vance. It reeks of Donald Trump. It reeks of Ted Cruz and the ways in which just this one issue is allowed, permitted through this sort of toxic and pernicious way to become a kind of golden calf at which our leaders, without our consent, seem to be bending the knee and praying. And it's unclear to me how long that can last for with the state of UK public opinion where it is.
This weekend, Keir Starmer celebrated his first anniversary as Prime Minister. But could his authority be in tatters already? Last week saw Labour rebels extract huge concessions from the government's landmark welfare bill, with the portion concerning personal independence payments for disabled people removed entirely. It was widely considered a blow for Starmer's grip on power, and even had some people questioning whether Chancellor Rachel Reeves could possibly remain in post. This is what Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson had to say about the debacle to BBC's Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday.
Reform is needed, but what the Prime Minister has said, and what I also believe, is that what we set out, we pushed ahead too fast, we didn't listen enough to people, including to lots of people who had concerns about the nature of that change.
In the House of Commons today, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride brought up the cost of Labour's two big U-turns in an urgent statement.
The Chief Secretary to the Treasury has just said that he now expects us to wait until the autumn to hear how they intend to cover the £6 billion of unfunded commitments which their U-turns have run up in the last month alone. A government divided, a government racking up unfunded spending, a government wrecking the public finances. And why is the Chief Secretary not prepared to explain how they will fund these U-turns? Well, there are surely only two possible answers, Madam Deputy Speaker. Either the Treasury have made them without a clue as to how they will be funded, or they do know but are refusing to tell us. Either is completely unacceptable. So can the Chief Secretary set aside the usual blather that we have just heard and tell us whether he knows how these unfunded tax commitments will be paid for, or is his government simply refusing to say? Madam Deputy Speaker, the House will also have noted the inherent contradiction in the Chief Secretary sticking to the line that decisions will be made at a fiscal event in the normal way, when that is precisely what the government have not done. By losing control of the finances and of his own parliamentary party, the government has made significant fiscal decisions outside of a fiscal event. So can I ask the Chief Secretary, the Chancellor said that at the budget she would not be coming back with more tax rises. Is this still the position? And will the Chief Secretary rule out a wealth tax, along with reconfirming that there will be no rise in income tax, national insurance or VAT?
I mean, you can see what Mel Stride is trying to do there is combine Labour's previous commitments of not raising national insurance or VAT and trying to wedge the wealth tax onto it, even though it's very, very popular with his own voters. Anyway, here's how Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, responded.
He asks me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to comment on forecasts of annually managed expenditure. He's asked me to comment on future tax decisions. He's a man, Madam Deputy Speaker, that knows how this works. All of that happens with a forecast and a budget, which will happen in the autumn.
So not many real answers there. But unhappy backbenchers could be about to inflict even more pain on the government over the issue of education, health and care plans, or EHCPs for short, for children with special educational needs. The government is preparing to overhaul provision for children with special educational needs and disabilities, known as SEND. This could restrict or even abolish educational plans for children with additional needs. Here's what Bridget Phillipson had to say about the upcoming overhaul on Sunday.
Now, there are nerves in your party. MPs I've spoken to are worried about the reforms that you're looking at. And they are worried potentially that you might phase out or diminish what are called EHCPs. So when a family is trying to get extra support for their kid, the sort of official legal document that gives them a right to extra support, will you rule out getting rid of those EHCPs?
What I can say very clearly is that we will strengthen and put in place better support for children. But I do just need to put this in the wider context of where we are at the moment, because this is, as you say, a complex and sensitive area where I've been spending a lot of time listening to parents, to disability rights groups, to campaigners and to others, and to colleagues across Parliament as well, because it's important to get this right. Now, it is tough, and there's a reason that the Conservatives ducked this and didn't look at it properly. We'll be setting out a schools white paper in the autumn that will set out wider reform, and it is important. I mean, I understand for parents, having access to that EHCP and what that brings is incredibly important.
But will you rule out getting rid of them?
I will make sure that every child gets the support maintained that they need.
But that's not
actually,
the question. It's about getting rid of these things.
It is about better and earlier support.
Currently, parents have the legal right to request that their local authority carries out an assessment to find out whether their child needs an education, health and care plan. Plans may involve the local authority paying for transport or specific therapies like speech and language therapy. Crucially, an EHCP is a legally binding document, which strengthens disabled children's access to the support that they and their parents need. Over 600,000 children and young people rely on EHCPs for support in England alone. And thousands of them could lose out on access to education if the government scraps EHCPs. Labour MPs are already briefing about their concerns. One MP went to The Guardian anonymously to say this. This could be a massive problem. We are hoping there will be proper engagement around it, but we are worried about some of the signals we are picking up. Another MP, also speaking anonymously, said this: people are really, really worried about this. It's one of the things that is going to make people feel very, very uncomfortable. But the government doesn't seem content to just throw disabled people and the parents of children with special educational needs into a state of panic. Labour has also rejected a petition calling for the personal allowance to be raised to protect state pensioners from income tax. Here's a headline: Labour refuses to shield state pension from retirement tax. Millions of retirees face being dragged into income tax net from next year. The personal allowance is the money you can earn before you start paying tax. It currently stands at about £12,500 per year, but due to the triple lock, which ensures that the state pension goes up with inflation, the state pension will exceed the tax-free personal allowance for the first time in 2026. So, millions of the poorest pensioners who rely on the state pension for their income will end up paying tax at a rate of 20% on the portion of it above $12,500. Pensioners' rights group Silver Voices submitted a petition to Downing Street with over 100,000 signatures, calling for the personal allowance threshold to be raised for pensioners now and in the future. This was rejected by the Treasury, which said neither the state pension nor any other benefits would be exempted from income tax. Are Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer's memories really so short that they've already forgotten the humiliating U-turn they were forced to take on scrapping the winter fuel allowance? And now they're inviting more backlash from pensioners, who, in case anyone's forgotten, are an incredibly powerful voting cohort. Between the gutted welfare bill, the potential restriction of plans for children with special educational needs, and income tax affecting the poorest pensioners, this Labour government is looking more and more like a government committed to maintaining and expanding austerity. Here was Prime Minister Keir Starmer just 8 months ago.
But the budget the Chancellor will deliver on Wednesday will prevent devastating austerity in our public services and prevent a disastrous path for our public finances. That's the reality of what would happen if we'd stuck to Tory spending plans.
David, I want to pull back and talk about the sort of fiscal straitjacket that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves had voluntarily put on. So they made fiscal rules the defining feature of their governance. There's 2 OBR forecasts a year, so on and so forth. And it's clearly not credible for them to stick within their rules. They've also ruled out tax rises. And they can't do both of those things and commit to the spending plans that they do have. What do you think the consequences might be for them if they choose to ditch any one of those rules?
I don't mean to be glib at all. It's striking to me this sadomasochism of this government, this combination of seeming to enjoy and repeat and come back to the infliction of pain on the public, and the masochism of the public's outward rejection of some of the most powerful blocks, as you say, of senior citizens, but also some of the most marginalized communities coming back to them and saying, you are destroying the prospects for our lives and livelihoods. At least in the United States, the Republican Party is advancing on a program similarly austere, similarly sadistic, but it's not masochistic because at least they enjoy the partisan benefits of a huge Republican Party that will have their back. What's crazy about this Labour government is, as you say, they don't seem to want to win any base of support. And they want us to accept the premise that they're doing the hard work that Tories just put off, which of course just makes them Tories. So one shouldn't enter too deep into the dragon's den of Labour's like magical thinking about economics and this fiscal straitjacket. And one need only look to Europe to understand what a fiction that is. Obviously, in some part of their head, they're haunted by the phantom of Liz Truss and a fear of a reaction on the markets. But of course, it basically comes down to their total unwillingness to take on any amount of established economic power in their country, any consideration, as was just being said. I mean, they've let the wealth tax become a boogeyman that haunts them. It's part of the sadomasochistic fetish that this government seems to have. They've taken this idea that it would be so that you might be able to redistribute wealth from the very, very top of British society, which has accumulated untold gold in the past 20 years, and redistribute some to special needs children and to poor retirees. They've let this become such an absurdity, a fantasy, and a boogeyman that haunts them politically. And so it's hard to, I resist the idea that we should really think seriously or take literally their concerns around fiscal space, because there are so many ways that we're seeing experimented all across the world, whether it's the Germans blowing up their Schwarz Null, or whether it's the Spaniards thinking about how to take on questions of taxation, fair taxation, that they're able to find money, able to move money, simple stuff that can be done from the Bank of England. I mean, there's all sorts of more technical mechanisms, as well as political maneuvering that can be done with the majority that Keir Starmer has. And they've seemed to have, this is why I come back to this without being glib, this idea that there's something fetishistic going on. It's tough to understand why they keep backing themselves deeper into a corner, watching the polls plummet against their favor, but completely resistant to the idea of any heterodox proposal that might come to them, any alternative paradigm around economic policy making, and it's entirely a cage of their own making.
I mean, I think there's a certain irony in Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves saying, we're going to have these fiscal rules and that's going to reassure the bond markets and make it cheaper to borrow, except it didn't. They didn't really like the budget that they came out with because no one bought the idea that you could stay within these rules that they arbitrarily decided for themselves and still get the growth and the public expenditure that they'd committed to. But because they'd, hamstrung themselves in this way already, they can't get rid of the rules because that creates even a further crisis of confidence. This whole thing, just a big old confidence game, in my opinion. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair appears to love nothing more than putting his name to atrocities committed in the Middle East. Don't break the habit of a lifetime, eh? We can't forget the Labour leader's illegal war in Iraq, as well as Britain's 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. And now his organisation, the Tony Blair Institute, appears to be at it too. This is a headline from the Financial Times. Tony Blair's staff took part in Gaza Riviera project with BCG. Former UK Prime Minister's Institute participated in meetings on plan to turn shattered enclave into trading hub. The Financial Times reports that staff at the Tony Blair Institute participated in meetings around the Gaza Riviera project with Boston Consulting Group, which included plans to turn the eviscerated territory into a trading hub. In case you didn't know who Boston Consulting Group are, they've played a key role in putting together the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That's the organisation that forces Palestinians in Gaza to form huge queues for relatively little food, only for the Israeli military to shoot them on a regular basis. According to the FT, the plan was outlined in a slide deck titled The Great Trust, from a demolished Iranian proxy to a prosperous Abrahamic ally. In that title, GREAT stands for Gaza Reconstitution, Economic Acceleration and Transformation. That deck was then shared with the Trump administration. Led by an Israeli businessman, it proposed paying 500,000 Palestinians to leave the area while attracting private investors to develop the enclave. Now, the Tony Blair Institute didn't author or endorse the final slide deck, but 2 members of staff did participate in message groups and calls as the project developed. That's according to the FT's sources. And the paper also reports this. One lengthy document on post-war Gaza, written by a TBI staff member, was shared within the group for consideration. This included the idea of a Gaza Riviera, with artificial islands off the coast akin to those in Dubai, blockchain-based trade initiatives, a deep water port to tie Gaza into the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, and low-tax special economic zones. The TBI document said the devastating war in Gaza had, quote, created a once-in-a-century opportunity to rebuild Gaza from first principles as a secure, modern, prosperous society. There's something so disgusting about that. Why isn't Gaza secure? Why isn't it prosperous? Why have they actually technologically regressed? Well, that's because Israel has them under a blockade since 2008, interspersed that blockade with occasional aerial bombardments, and is now waging a genocidal war on Gaza. But no. Maybe the people are just backward. Maybe it's not because the Israelis deliberately created that set of circumstances. Now, we should say that the FT reports that the final project covered in the slides differs significantly from the Tony Blair Institute's paper. While the Tony Blair Institute may have been envisaging island playgrounds for the rich and rubbing its hands at that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that a genocide presents, it also didn't call for paying Gazans to leave their territory. Now, when approached for comment, the Tony Blair Institute denied its staff were involved in the Gaza Riviera project. When the FT presented 12 pages of evidence, the Institute admitted that staff had been involved in cause, but was, quote, essentially in listening mode. God, that's so fucking call me Tony, isn't it? And the spokesperson said, quote, it would be wrong to suggest that we were working with this group to produce their Gaza plan. The final version of the plan, the one shared with the Trump administration, involves all of Gaza's public land being put into a trust for development. The enclave's assets would then be sold to investors via digital tokens traded on a blockchain. And what would Palestinians in Gaza get in return? They would be given the opportunity to contribute their privately owned land to the trust in return for a token that gave them the right to a permanent housing unit. And it involves a number of development projects. So you can see on this map here, in the north, there would be the Elon Musk manufacturing zone, as well as 6 to 8 planned cities billed as, quote, modern and dynamic. In the south, there would be something called the American Data Safe Haven, involving regional data centers with, quote, special US AI regulation. And along the coast, there would be the Trump Riviera, as well as the fake resort islands. David, what do you make of this? To what extent do you think that these reports implicate the Tony Blair Institute in basically what's a super luxe development built on a crime against humanity?
There's, I think, 2 points to be made here. Obviously, it's a grotesquerie beyond imagination to see these maps and to see this dystopian vision that's being outlined for the starving people of Gaza who are being systematically genocided by the state of Israel, while these consultants are off designing plans for AI centers and Elon Musk's industrial parks. One key point that I think is important, and it's important to emphasize, I know I keep coming back to my origins in the United States. BCG is but one of a series of consulting firms that have played a malignant role, obviously in the course of this genocide, but in general, they are a cancer on our universities from which they recruit young people with the promise of a good paying job and a chance to learn about the world of business and beyond. And they're a cancer under our democracies, where they suck up public contracts and take that money and cross-subsidize R&D towards industrial grade surveillance technologies and military innovations that then are deployed against innocent populations and civilians across the world. I'm thinking of BCG, I'm thinking of McKinsey, I'm thinking of Accenture, the largest consulting firms in the world, deeply implicated in the development of biometric systems deployed by the government of Narendra Modi in collaborations with the IDF to develop artificial intelligence that can then be deployed to use quadricopters to kill civilians. And yet we allow these major consulting firms to continue to operate in and around our political systems, in and around our municipal governments, sucking up public money and sucking up young talent to do this incredibly not just dirty but criminal work on behalf of armies and mercenaries across the world. So that's one key piece. And I think we should take seriously the other side of this Tony Blair Institute story, which is the BCG part. And there needs to be a much more robust response from all of us, all across the world, to say, not in our name are we going to have our governments contract BCGs and McKinseys and Accentures who are, halfway across the world committing crimes against humanity. The TBI aspect of it, the Tony Blair Institute aspect of it, obviously there's been this back and forth with the journalists. But I think if we're thinking about accountability here, we should start first and foremost with the role that the Tony Blair Institute now plays in British democracy. It is simply a fact that this institute is gobbling up its own public contracts with the Keir Starmer government. As however much distance the government would like to draw between itself, and certainly not calling itself New Labour, and the Blair years, there is an active financial and very lucrative relationship between the Starmer government and the Institute. And I think it's only coming by marrying a deeper investigation of the Institute's global footprint with a deeper and more delicate understanding of the precise role it's playing domestically, that there can be a kind of robust and enduring response that seeks some kind of accountability for this deeply scandalous episode.
All I'll say is this, is that the Tony Blair Institute has never met a despot whose money it doesn't like. Former Greek finance minister and author Yanis Varoufakis has never been shy about expressing his opinions. So today, we invited him on the show to talk about a range of issues. We discussed the prospect of a new left party and its rocky start last week, as well as the idea of Elon Musk starting a new political party in the US. And we also wanted to get his views on the government's prescription of Palestine Action and the subsequent arrest of demonstrators who broke the law to support the group on Saturday. And that is where things got a little bit risky for us. Let's take a look. I began by asking Yanis about the new left party being launched by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, and whether it matters whether some reports indicate that some people close to Corbyn weren't on board with Sultana's bid for co-leader. And how important is this moment for a new left-wing organisation? Here's what he had to say.
This Labour Party deserves to be ditched. I'm so happy that Zara Sultana left. I mean, look at the way that this Starmer government has been behaving. Despised and despising voted for them. And they keep courting and flattering the people who never voted for them and never will. Even Blair, a very poor excuse for human nature, that he was more of dissent. People like Tony Benn, indeed, of Jeremy Corbyn within the Labour Party. Keir Starmer lacks the charisma of Tony Blair, shares the idle tendencies and the predilection for war crimes, but he lacks the charisma. So, to cut a long story short, look, I've known Jeremy Corbyn for a very long time. We've walked together on the streets. We have picketed together. We have appeared together. We're constantly coordinating our campaigns. Zara Sultana I've met twice, but I can assure you that those two occasions were enough for me to know that she brings to this new outfit, to this new party, call it what you might, that which is absolutely necessary. And it's not just that she's a young woman and that she comes from an ethnic background, but she has an intensity and a caliber which inspires me. I'm speaking for myself. So this is the right moment for a new party to leave behind the trail of disasters that Keir Starmer has brought upon the British working class, the British left, ever since he usurped the leadership of the Labour Party by claiming to be the continuity candidate of remaining faithful to the great Labour Party manifestos of 2017 and 2019. And in the end, he is proving a worse danger for the vast majority of the British people, not to mention world peace, than the Tories were. So I hope that the wind that blows into the sails of the new party turn out to be auspicious and that the initial hiccups are forgotten very soon.
I mean, how do you manage this moment where, of course, everything has been backroom negotiations so far in private, and now is the moment when you're letting the movement in? How do you absorb new members, new interest, new party democracy, while still having a very decisive and strong sense of strategy? So compared to Reform, for instance, Nigel Farage doesn't do party democracy, but he's a man of singular vision. How do you think that trade-off needs to be managed between strategy and, I guess, mass organizing, mass participation, mass democracy?
Allow me to comment first on the notion of Nigel Farage as a visionary, which I reject. He has no vision. He's just extremely adept at cottoning on to particular sensitivities and sensibilities of people who are desperate, who've been abandoned, who have been held back by the powers that be, and he, harvests very skillfully their anger in order to essentially acquire for himself power, which he will, with mathematical precision, use against the people that trust him. That's not a visionary. That's a Mussolini-esque kind of populist. Jeremy Corbyn is not that. And Zara Sultana is not that. And none of the comrades who joined that party or will be joining that party. Now, to answer your question, however, look, there are two models for kickstarting a new political movement, a progressive one, a socialist one. One is to do it in a very Stalinist, not ideologically, but in terms of organization lines, of being very careful as to who you let in, of effectively having bouncers at the door and checking the credentials of everybody who comes in. The problem with that is that from the word go, you begin by creating a hierarchy, an ironclad kind of thought police to ensure that the wrong people are kept outside. Now, this model, this concentrated model, has its benefits. You do avoid some of the pitfalls of the second model, which is the open model, of letting anyone in. And then, once they're in, going through lots and lots and lots of painful processes by which to weed out the people who should not have been allowed in. Because, let's face it, whenever a new party is created, and I have this experience here in Greece, all sorts of slightly deranged people who have been looking for an opportunity to enter the political scene come in. There are people who are enterists, and I don't mean Trotskyites, I mean people who come in order to do damage to the party. There will always be that. So there are pros and cons for both those types of organization. I go for the latter. It's painful. There will be a backlash when it appears that some people who speak for the party, let's say in 1 or 2 years' time, turn out to have been, as I said, enterists with ill intent, not well-meaning enterists. But no openness, and there is no substitute for the wild beauty of a genuine grassroots democracy within the movement.
Picking up on this thought of wild beauty, Corbynism, when it was at its peak in 2017, secured 40% of the vote. And it was a wildly optimistic time. It felt good to be part of the movement at that point. Through the 2019 defeats, through the smears, it feels very different now. So I suppose I've got 2 questions for you. One is it possible to revive a sense of optimism when many activists will be hardened and perhaps rendered cynical through those experiences that led up to the 2019 defeat? And the second question is whether it's inevitable that any new left project will be on a much smaller scale than Corbynism in 2017. And even if it is on that smaller scale, do you think it can still be effective?
It will have to be on a smaller scale because, let's face it, we on the left, we don't get that many opportunities like the ones we got here in 2015 here in Greece, which my leadership essentially binned. And the result is that we're now struggling to take off again. But that's okay. That's okay because, you see, the capitalist techno-feudal system that we live in cannot stop itself from generating larger and deeper and more toxic crises. So there will be a moment quite soon when there will be a lot of people out there who will be looking for a program. They will be looking for a group of people that seem to be genuine. And at that point, something that may start small now will grow in significance and maybe who knows when, but the time will come. It's a bit like surfing. You have to be ready to catch the wave. You're not going to create the wave. The wave will come when the wave comes. These are the forces of history that will determine that. But, in the exploitative model that we live, society we live, the wave will come. So it is important not to have the Starmerites in control of the party that will take that wave and destroy it or use it against the people. It is important to have a party like the one that is now in the offing. And you know what, Ash, I think that it is very important to show to the people out there, even to those who are seemingly skeptical at the moment and who are sitting on the fence, to show to them that there is a different way of doing politics, that there are minimum ethical standards, that you can have decision-making which is effective without rigid patriarchal hierarchies. This is why I think that this combination of my older colleague, a man who's been in the barricades for so very long, has proven his credentials as a genuine, honest broker for peace, for anti-austerity, for solidarity, for international cooperation, together with a young woman carries with her a complete kind of oomph, of oeuvre, that they can share the leadership and to do it in a way that breaks the mold and shifts us away from the type of leadership that Keir Starmer has shown.
I want to move on to US politics, if that's okay. So Elon Musk and Donald Trump, they couldn't stay in alignment for very long. And now Musk has announced his intention to form a third party. Do you think that this signals a wider conflict between Trump and, the people who you call in your book the techno-feudalists? Or is this a product because of Elon Musk's, shall we say, unique combination of ego and entitlement?
Well, I see no rift between the techno-feudal cabal and the Donald Trump is winning, hands down, courtesy of the Democratic Party. If you look at the two bills, very significant bills that he's managed to put through Congress, the big, beautiful bill, which is essentially a gigantic giveaway to the techno-feudal lords and to other kinds of oligarchs. They are laughing all the way to the bank. They love the Donald for this. Even Elon Musk loves him for this. And the second bill, remember the Genius Act? Essentially, and I really would love to alert our viewers and listeners at Novara to the immensity of the Genius Act, essentially by legitimizing what is called stablecoins. I'm not going to go into the technicalities. It's a kind of cryptocurrency which is pegged to the US dollar. By turning them into instruments of the state, essentially, he's privatizing the dollar. And that is a magnificent gift to big tech. Some of you may remember that some years ago, Mark Zuckerberg tried to create his own currency. He called it the Libra or Diem or something like that. He wanted to have his own cryptocurrency so that people could trade on Facebook, on WhatsApp through it. And Wall Street conspired to kill it. Now Trump is coming with the Genius Act and he is legitimizing that. So no, the techno-feudal ruling class loves Donald Trump. Elon Musk had his ego bruised because he harbored over-optimistic expectations as to how much he could manipulate the Donald. This is just two spoiled brats fighting it out. It doesn't have much significance. I think in the end, Elon Musk is going to just roll over. I don't think he has what it takes in order to have any significant political impact. And in the end, the Donald Trump presidency, or should I say a royal cabal, are going to find a way of roping him back in.
I mean, you seem very skeptical of the possibility that Elon Musk's third party could pose a real risk to Trump. But I mean, whether it's tariffs or whether it was the possibility of America being dragged into a drawn-out conflict with Iran, there are potential rifts and schisms within the MAGA coalition. What ones do you think pose the biggest danger to Donald Trump? And is there any way for the American left to exploit that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The only good thing about the fascists and the establishment is that they're full of contradictions that we of the left should be able to exploit. But the contradiction is not between Donald Trump and Elon Musk in the case of the MAGA movement. The contradiction, you may recall, was between Steve Bannon, who represents the genuinely populist, much more nuanced and smart faction of American fascism. So it was Steve Bannon versus Elon Musk. And at the beginning, Donald Trump was much closer to Elon Musk. He was, I don't know why, he was very impressed by the rockets and the cars and all this and that. And Steve Bannon played the waiting game and essentially managed to elbow Elon Musk out. Now, the great contradiction, speaking now as a political economist, as a Marxist, is class-based. Here we have a genuine contradiction within the MAGA movement. So, Ash, on the one hand, Donald Trump is waxing lyrical about the blue-collar workers in Indiana, in the Midwest, that supported him and on whose votes he relied in order to return to the White House. He talks a good game when it comes to tariffs, the idea being to bring back manufacturing to the United States, and he's going to bring back manufacturing to the United States. I don't know how much, how many jobs, what quality jobs he will manage to magnetize back to the US. He will, though. But let's say, and here's the crux of the contradiction in the MAGA movement. Let's say he succeeds to eliminate the trade surplus. Sorry, I'll say that again. Let's say that he succeeds in eliminating the trade deficit of the United States through his tariff program, through devaluing the dollar, through stable coins, through the various tricks that he is using. Well, immediately, the flow of foreigners' capital into Wall Street is going to stop. Why? Because all this money that floods into New York from abroad, and has been since the 1970s, it was the flip side of the same coin being the American trade deficit. To understand that, think, every time Americans bought Mercedes-Benzes and clothes from China and whatever, goodies from abroad, they were paying with dollars. The dollars were going to foreign capitalists. Those foreign capitalists were then sending these dollars back to Wall Street for recycling. And those dollars became American government debt, equities, shares, and, very importantly, real estate. Remember, Donald Trump is a realtor. So, once you eliminate the trade deficit of the United States, you eliminate this tsunami of capital that comes into New York. So, if he succeeds to serve the interest of the blue-collar white working class that voted him in, by eliminating the trade surplus and bringing enough manufacturing jobs back to the Midwest, he will make some rentiers like himself, some people in the real estate industry in Wall Street, very cross. And at that point, he will have to choose between two different social classes, whom to betray. Betray the working class or betray his mates in the financial community and the real estate business. Now, I have no doubt that he will betray the working class. This is a great opening for the left. I don't need to say more on this.
Well, I've got one final question for you, and I think it flows on quite nicely from what you just said. In terms of American socialists and progressives, people who are politically active, organizers, strategists, what should they be doing to prepare for the 2028 presidential elections?
Leave the Democratic Party. Do what Zara Sultana did, what Jeremy Corbyn is doing. Get out of the center-left pretend progressive party. Let's face it, the Democratic Party of the United States is never going to tolerate an AOC, a Mamdani, a Bernie Sanders. We saw that in 2016 and in 2020. They prefer Donald Trump to be in the White House than somebody like Bernie Sanders. They will do anything to ensure that a toxic right-winger, and that's the Democratic Party I'm talking about, wins rather than have somebody from the left wing of their own party win. They are the party of Wall Street. They are the party of most of big tech, even though big tech now, well, kicking and screaming, they have embraced the Donald. So my message to the Democratic Socialists of America is, I know that when you're facing the first past the post system, this is the problem you have in the United Kingdom. You are facing an Everest, the Himalayas, in terms of the electoral effort you will have to put into climbing it. But it's worth it, because nothing you do in the Democratic Party will ever lead to anything other than a betrayal from within the National Democratic Committee.
Now, did you notice something missing there? That's right, the entire section on Palestine Action. That's because it was a part of my interview with Yanis Varoufakis that, unfortunately, I'm unable to show you at this point in time. I asked him for his views about the proscription of Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation, and after consulting with lawyers, we're not yet confident that we can publish them without putting him or Novara media staff at risk of arrest by counter-terrorism police. But we're not giving up. We're still seeking further legal advice, and we stand by our right as journalists to report newsworthy comments made by a noteworthy person. But this speaks to something we've said since the beginning. Prescription under the Terrorism Act, and how broadly the legislation is drafted, means that the state can go after anyone they deem as supporting or being reckless as to whether they cause others to support Palestine Action. There is no journalistic exemption. Reporting freely carries the risk of large fines and even up to 14 years imprisonment. We at Novara think that the prescription of Palestine Action was a terrible, politically motivated decision taken in bad faith by Keir Starmer's government in an attempt to crush pro-Palestinian activism. And we remain steadfast in our opposition to it. Now, Yanis Varoufakis, if you listen to the beginning of his comments, didn't think that the early teething pains would matter that much in the grand scheme of things when it comes to this new Zara Sultana Jeremy Corbyn party. But over the weekend, we saw WhatsApp messages from the new party organising committee being leaked to right-wing media, and there does seem to be a real climate of mistrust amongst senior figures. This is something that we're going to cover in a lot more detail on Novara Live in the days and weeks to come, but the one thing I'll say is this. If you're going to start a new party, no matter what it's called, no matter who's leading it, if you're starting from the point of mistrust and leaks, you're not going to get anywhere fast. That's like the worst of the Corbyn years between 2017, 2019, all over again. The new thing has really got to feel new. And that starts with treating people a bit better. Anyway, that has been our show for tonight. I think we've got a super chat, £5 from the Cat Lou. Thank you so much, Cat Lou. Just to recommend the Ash/Blind Boy Boat Club Downstream chat. Excellent discussion. Love Novara. It was such a joy to talk to Blind Boy. This is my second interview with him, and he is just one of the most gifted storytellers of our time, in my opinion. Thank you to David Adler, who had to shoot off, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.